All right, it is 10 o'clock, so we're going to get things rolling here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is our second PHSA Together Against Misinformation event. My name is Joshua Grant. I'm a communication specialist at the BC Centre for Disease Control. Today, I'm calling in from 1333 West Broadway, one of the PHSA offices on the never ceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. Very grateful to live, work, and play on these lands that First Nations have cared for since time immemorial. To start us off, we have Elder Glyda Morgan of the Tla'amin Nation graciously joining us here at the PHSA office on Broadway. I am going to hand it over to Elder Glyda for a welcome. Thank you, Elder Glyda.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And as Josh had mentioned, I'm Elder Glyda Morgan from the Tla'amin Nation, my mother's people, always honoring my life giver. Tla'amin Nation is located on the Sunshine Coast. And my father was born in Church House, BC, Hamalko Nation, relocated to Campbell River. And it's my great honor to be here to open in a good way for PHSA Together Against Misinformation virtual event. And always remembering the work that we do and doing it in our best way possible. And when I do this work, I always remember who I am doing this for. And I think about our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and those yet to be born. And so I always like to bring our sacred virtual circle together and open with a song, inviting to listen with an open heart, open mind. Oh, ho, 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 oh, 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 we are the children of the world. We are the flowers in the sun. We are the home of tomorrow. We are the children of the world. Oh, 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 oh. We are the children of the always remembering our sacred children, inviting you to pray in your own way as I offer a blessing, always saying there's no right or wrong way to pray. Just asking the Creator, the grandmothers, the great grandmothers, and the grandfathers, the great grandfathers, and all of our ancestors come into our sacred circle. Just giving thanks for this day, giving thanks for each person here, for their families and colleagues, asking for blessings for all of our sacred animals, the ones that fly in the sky and swim in our oceans, rivers, and lakes, for the ones that crawl upon our first holy Mother Earth, for the two-leggeds and the four-leggeds. Creator, I'm asking for blessings for all the ones that are needing to be lifted up in a good way, for the ones that have challenges, the many challenges that we face today, Creator, asking for blessings and just giving thanks for all the beauty that we do have in our lives as we move forward today in a good way. And I'm asking for prayers of peace within our own hearts, within our offices, within our nations, within our country, and right around our first Holy Mother Earth, asking for prayers of peace in a good and humble way. And again, I'm giving thanks for each person here as we begin in a good way. All my relations, Imot Squayagan, Haichka, Osian. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, from my heart to yours. Thank you. Osian. Osian. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elder Glyda, for starting us off in a good way today. And thank you so much for coming in person. It really means a lot. And it was great to meet you. I'll quickly hand things over to Greg Martin, Chief Administrative Officer for PHSA Research and Academic Services, for some opening remarks. Greg, over to you. Sorry, Greg, I think you're just on mute there.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry. Thanks everybody for taking the time to be with us today. As Joshua, I'm grateful to be joining you this morning from the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, where I too have the pleasure of living, working, and playing. This is our second annual Research Misinformation event, and it's great to see colleagues from across PHSA, from our research institutes, and our partners in public health and academia here with us this morning. Misinformation has become one of the most significant challenges facing our health systems. It's no longer something that lives only online. It directly affects how people make decisions about treatment, about prevention, and public health guidance. Clinicians and public health teams are spending increasing time correcting misleading information, and we're seeing the real impacts on patient care, on trust, and on pressures on our system. As a province-wide organization with a mandate for specialized care and public health leadership, PHSA has an important role to play. Our communities look to us for clarity, for evidence, and for trustworthy information. Events like this help us strengthen that responsibility by examining not only what misinformation looks like, but why people believe it and how we can respond to it more effectively. We're joined today, and I'm grateful for all of the speakers that have taken their time to be with us today, who each bring a unique perspective to this issue and this conversation. There are full bios in the program that you have, but I will briefly welcome Dr. Timothy Caulfield, who will explore how political identity and ideology shape susceptibility to misinformation, work that has guided public health responses across Canada and globally. Dr. Alistair McAlpin, whose frontline clinical experience highlights how vaccine misinformation shows up in real time from social media to the waiting room. Aishwarya Nagar, who will be speaking about managing harmful health rumors that make it harder for us to prepare for and respond to public health emergencies. And finally, pleased to welcome Lucas Wilson, our provincial lead for partnerships and networks from Transcare BC, who will be joining us for the panel a little later on. We're really fortunate to hear from these experts whose work touches on different aspects of this challenge. They'll help us think about societal forces that drive misinformation, the experiences of frontline clinicians, and the ways that harmful rumors influence public health response. Their insights will help us reflect on what PHSA can and should do next, not just individually, but as a coordinated system. I hope that we all leave today with a deeper appreciation of the complexity of misinformation, a clearer sense of our organizational role in addressing it, a shared commitment to strengthening PHSA's culture and your own organization's culture of evidence-driven, trustworthy communication. And I really genuinely want to thank again our research and communications team for organizing our working group for organizing this session. And thank all of you very much again for taking the time to be a part of this conversation. And with that, I am pleased to pass back to Joshua and get to our speakers. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks so much, Greg. Appreciate you taking the time to join us to help us kick things off here. Just a few quick notes before we get into our presentations. This event is being recorded and it will be posted online afterwards if you want to share with friends or colleagues. We're going to kick things off with Professor Timothy Caulfield, our keynote speaker, followed by a couple of research and action presentations, and then we'll wrap things up with a Q&A session and a panel discussion. At some point throughout, you'll see a QR code on your screen that will bring you to Slido. So we're going to be saving questions for the presenters until the end for the Q&A and panel discussion. But you can send in your questions on Slido, upvote other questions that you think are important to have answered. Obviously, we won't be able to, probably won't be able to get to every question, but we will do our best. When the event is over, that same link will bring you to an evaluation survey, and we'd love to get your feedback, hoping to organize more events like this in the future. And we will be offering a prize randomly selected to one of the people who takes the time to fill out that survey. So without further ado, I will introduce Professor Timothy Caulfield. He teaches at the Faculty of Law and School of Public Health at the University of Alberta, where he is Research Director of the Health Law Institute. He was the Canada Research Chair in Health Law and Policy from 2002 to 2023. He's published almost 400 academic articles related to his interdisciplinary research on topics like stem cells, genetics, research ethics, the public representations of science, and public health policy. He's a member of the Order of Canada, a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences, and the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. He's won academic, science communication, and writing awards and published several best-selling books. His most recent book, a #1 national bestseller, is called The Certainty Illusion: What You Don't Know and Why It Matters. Professor Caulfield is the co-founder of this science engagement initiative, Science Up First, which actually inspired us to put together this PHSA misinformation event for the first time last year. He's also hosted and produced documentaries, including the award-winning TV show, A User's Guide to Cheating Death. And his keynote presentation, as Greg mentioned, is going to cover how political ideology and identity can influence our susceptibility to misinformation. Over to you, Professor Caulfield.
Thanks so much for that kind introduction, and I apologize for putting my screen up a little bit prematurely. It's just because I'm so keen to talk about this topic, because I agree with how this was framed. This is without a doubt one of the greatest challenges that we're facing right now. The spread of misinformation. It really has become a a global crisis. And today I want to be a little bit provocative. I want to drill down a little bit on the role of political identity, and how that has become a dominant theme. And I've been at this for decades, and I'm often asked, what's different now? How is misinformation, especially in the health space, different now? And this is one of the biggest elements. I cannot believe the degree to which the embrace of health misinformation is tethered to political identity. And I want to have two spoilers off the top here. Number one, this is not a partisan presentation. This is not, pointing the finger at the right, because we all do this. That's really important caveat off the top. The other spoiler is the degree to which this is true. I've been studying vaccination hesitancy for a long time, and yes, there's a whole bunch. It's a complex topic, but right now in North America, and to some degree also in the UK, there is absolutely no doubt that at a population level, political identity is the single biggest variable. And yes, there's a lot. We have to be careful not to overinterpret that. There's a lot baked into that variable. Whether you live in urban or rural settings, socioeconomics, education, but as a variable, there's no doubt that it's the strongest variable right now tethered to vaccination hesitancy. And I think this is true for other bits of health misinformation. So let's get started. Let's dive in with the reality. Oh, and of course, my slide is frozen after all that. Okay, I'm gonna stop my sharing and I'm gonna share again, and hopefully it's gonna be fine this time. Of course it will. Let's see. There we go. Okay. Let's just look at the reality of what's happening in our world right now. We're constantly bombarded with health misinformation. I don't need to convince this audience of this, but this is just one great example. The Tylenol debacle, let's call it that, which is really an astounding development. And right now, as we speak today, right now in the United States, they're revisiting their vaccine approval policies in a way that, of course, is going to be tremendously problematic. Let me put it that way. And many people listening to this might also remember just a few weeks ago, late October, we have this tweet from the President of the United States. And the reason I'm putting this up is because I think it highlights the degree to which we've become numb to the spread of misinformation. This is an incredible social media post. It was shared everywhere. Virtually every sentence, or I don't think we should really call them sentences. Let's call them the collection of words, is incorrect, right? Absolutely everything. It's wrong, 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 wrong. Just everything about this is wrong. But we've become numb to this. And that's important for a bunch of reasons. We shouldn't forget that while we laugh at this or just get frustrated with this has an impact, right? It's the normalization of incredibly harmful misinformation. And there is a good news part to this story, which I'm going to come back to at the end. Over the past 6 months, and again, this is an area I've been in for a very long time, I am sensing a rising. I'm sensing a rising from experts, from health organizations, all around the world, pushing back against the noise like I've never seen before. This is something that many of us have been calling for, and we're starting to see it as highlighted. Just one example of literally thousands is highlighted by this piece that was in the New England Journal of Medicine yesterday, right? A dozen former heads of the FDA saying, we've got to stop this BS. It's killing people. Okay. This is one of my core premises. We all know that trust is in decline, trust in institutions, trust in healthcare providers, trust in science more broadly. This is a genuine issue, and trust is an incredibly complex phenomenon, as we'll probably get to a little bit later. And there are communities that have historically justified reasons for distrusting institutions. But again, looking at this at a population level, right now, most of the distrust that exists right now has been manufactured by the spread of misinformation. It's been manufactured by the spread of misinformation as captured by this Lancet editorial that came out earlier this year. Disinformation has become a deliberate instrument to attack and discredit scientists and health professionals for political gain. And I think we can't forget this. And I'll come back to why that is important. Oh, frozen again. Okay, I am to stop this and come back. This time it's going to work. Okay. One of the things I want to highlight off the top, because this is something that I struggle with, and maybe people listening to this have already thought about this, what I am talking about is misinformation. One of the political elements to this story is increasingly the word misinformation has been co-opted, and it has been held up as a signal of censorship or a signal of someone being against freedom of expression, which isn't the case at all, right? If you believe in the Enlightenment, if you believe in the science, the power of the scientific process, if you believe we can use that process to nudge us closer to some objective truth of reality, perhaps never getting there, it's a flawed human endeavor. The one I'm talking about is misinformation. There are things that aren't true, that are demonstrably false, given the current body of evidence. The world is not flat, right? We did go to the moon, right? Here are the Queen's corgis. Do you guys know about the Queen's corgis? They're so cute, aren't they? Apparently they were buried alive with the Queen. Of course, that's demonstrably false, right? Biden was not cloned and was not executed and replaced by clones. And though it might feel like it, the world is not run by lizard people. These are all things that are demonstrably false, right? But there are other things that are equally false, that are flat earth ideas, that are shaping the way Canadians think about their health. And this is the CMA survey that came out earlier this year. I know they're going to release another one, I think, in early February. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I just want to highlight one, a flat earth, demonstrably false idea that continues to have a tremendous impact. And of course, this is the lie. The lie. It's always been a lie. It's still a lie. It's always been a lie that vaccines cause autism. And if you just look at these numbers, and yes, it's a survey, it's with all the inherent methodological flaws of a survey, but there's been many, many, many studies that highlight this. And the important thing is the direction of belief, right? More and more Canadians, more and more Americans are believing this, or at least are open to the idea, right? This is another survey, a very recent one done in the United States that, again, highlights this, the power of misinformation. And the one reason I think this is a particularly important survey is because it really highlights the power of doubt mongering. You don't have to totally embrace the lie for that lie to have an impact on health behaviors. So in this survey, which was done by the Kaiser Foundation, they do great work. They ask what I think is a very modest question, right? Do you think the COVID vaccines are generally safe, right? Not a big ask, just generally safe. I think that's a very conservative question, right? And look at the responses. Look, let's pause here and just remind the audience, and this audience knows this, but let's just, get it out there. The COVID vaccines are probably the most studied biomedical intervention in human history, right? In human history. We know an awful lot about them despite, and there's, ongoing independent monitoring, safety monitoring, et cetera, et cetera. Despite that reality, look at these numbers. Only 32% think generally safe, and yes, there's a huge political element to this too, right? And that 52, that gray, don't know enough, that's huge, right? If you are thinking about, that's the power of doubt mongering, creating just uncertainty that will for sure have an impact on health behavior. And yes, we're seeing the same thing in a whole bunch of women's issues over and over again. This is again a Kaiser Foundation relatively recent study showing the degree of misinformation about abortions that are embraced by the American public. And you can bet the numbers would be very similar here in Canada. So this slide kind of captures the point I'm trying to make here. There aren't always right answers. This audience knows it. Science is hard, especially in the biomedical space. Science, it's always evolving. We're always arguing. That's exactly what should happen in science. But some answers, given the current body of evidence, are clearly wrong. And even if we focus on that stuff, we can make a real difference. Okay, the other point I want to make, and this audience already knows it, it's bonkers out there. And I think we really need to have a sense of an appreciation for how bad it's gotten. Now, often when I talk about this, I use a bunch of really, absurd examples of what's happening, from health influencers, etc. But let's just jump right into some of the numbers here. And this is the kind of work that we do at the Institute, but this was a study done from Australia that found about 60% of fitness influencer videos incorrect, harmful, problematic. This is a study that we published just last year, came out late last year, where we looked at books about cancer. We're doing a lot of research on cancer misinformation right now, and this one is fascinating because look, if you God forbid you get a cancer diagnosis or a loved one gets a cancer diagnosis, a completely reasonable thing to do would be to go to Amazon, maybe not Amazon, but let's say, go to Amazon and look for a book on point, right? And what we found was half of those books, and again, the coding frame was very conservative, very modest, about half of those books problematic, filled with misinformation. Ugh, I gotta go out and come back. I have no idea what's happening here. Filled with misinformation, you guys. And the news gets a little bit worse. That first page, on that first page of your search, we found that 70% of the books, and many people don't leave the first page, 70% of the books filled with misinformation. Here's another study, touching on IUDs, that found incredibly high proportion of misinformation on this topic online, on TikTok in particular. More videos had a negative tone about IUDs than a positive one, and many of the videos, the goal was to stoke distrust in healthcare professionals. Again, going back to that point that we heard from Lancet, right? This is they create distrust in order to make space for their own bits of misinformation. Again, I got to go out and come back in. I have no idea what's happening here. I've never had this problem before, but we will forge ahead. Here's another study looking at the same thing with UTIs, and another study looking at TikTok misinformation with pelvic floor conditions. And the reason I want to highlight this one is, look, you guys know this, there's so much misinformation out there on women's health, but often, as this study highlights, and there have been other studies that have noted this, the videos, the content that gets the highest engagement is the worst stuff, right? So the bad stuff gets traction. This was an analysis done by CBC. I was involved in this CBC Marketplace show, where they found about 80% of the videos on autism and cancer, no good science to back up the claims. On and on and on. It's absolutely the scale of the problem, the scope of the problem is so monstrous that it's almost become, misinformation has almost become the norm online. And that, of course, brings us a little bit more to the political identity part of this story. And I think the ivermectin story is such a great example of it. I mean, the ivermectin phenomenon is, how would you even explain, if you could get in a time machine and go back 7 years, how would you even explain this to yourself, right? There's this random anti-parasitic that's going to become an ideological flag for your team, for your community. And that is exactly what is increasingly happening. Now, I've written a lot about the ivermectin phenomenon, but I think this piece in the New York Times really captures what's going on. Ivermectin has become like a MAGA hat. And again, I'm not being partisan here, right? That's just in this cultural moment, that's what's happening, right? It becomes a symbol as much as it is about your health or about what the science actually says on point. And we're seeing, in fact, it's become so much a political identity that's almost like a religion, right? Your embrace of ivermectin. And I don't know if you knew this, this is leading to policy action in the United States, where an increasing number of states are making it mandatory that ivermectin has to be available over the counter, right? And we're seeing the same kind of political identity phenomenon happen with seed oils. We're seeing it happen with the fluoride debate. We're seeing it happen with the raw milk debate. We're seeing it happen in the context of raw water. I don't know if you guys know about this phenomenon. People are pushing the idea that we should be drinking raw water, not clean water, raw water, because you don't want your government interfering. That's government overreach, creating. I think you could make an argument that clean water is one of the greatest achievements of civilization. Raw water will probably kill 500,000 humans this year alone just from diarrhea, right? Just from diarrhea. But people are out there pushing the idea of raw water because you don't want government putting stuff in your water, and the raw water helps your microbiome, and it helps align your life force energy, and it also cleans your colon, which would probably be the diarrhea, right? And they're also, so they got raw milk, raw water, and raw testicles has become another big phenomenon. This is part of the manosphere, the idea that eating raw testicles will somehow increase your testosterone and make you more manly. I do love how this article starts, though. A Florida man. And I've tried this, by the way, and it was absolutely disgusting. So all of this is absurd, but as I've already alluded to, this is having a real policy impact, right? It's having a real policy impact where in the United States, you have Kennedy has said that he wants to lower the standards for these emerging technologies. Again, something that came out today, I think is breaking news, that they want to have a requirement for less clinical trials to get approval from the FDA, which is, of course, ironic given what they're doing with vaccines. So this is having a real impact, this sort of normalization of misinformation. And it's happening so much in the women's space. You have the manosphere, and you also have the trad wife phenomenon, which is becoming very popular on social media, and it's having an influence on a host of health issues. One of the interesting parts of this trad wife phenomenon is you might be trad wife curious or manosphere curious, and you get online and you just kind of want to laugh at these posts. But what happens is the algorithm sees that, and you're laughing at the trad wife phenomenon, then all of a sudden you're getting anti-vax content, you're getting anti-abortion content, you're getting supplement content, the conspiracy theories start coming in, and you start getting pulled into a rabbit hole. And we know that happens, which brings me to the next obvious point I want to make. Yeah, it's social media. Everyone knows this, right? And by social media, I put in that same Venn diagram, influencers writ large, but also, podcasters. This, really has changed how humanity gets their information. But what I do want to highlight and emphasize more is the degree to which this is about rage, the degree to which it's about fear and grievance. The algorithms reward content that play to those kinds of ideas, right? Study after study after study shows that. There's a big body of evidence on this, I think. But this study is just one example. And I like this one because it highlights the degree to which extreme content, no surprise, gets more clicks, more likes, more shares. But the other thing that happens is because we all live in an echo chamber, if you live in an echo chamber where, for example, you're drinking urine, all of a sudden that's not extreme anymore, right? So you have to make your content even more extreme for your echo chamber. So now it's aged urine, which is a real thing, you guys, that people are starting to drink. Completely absurd, but it highlights the degree to which our information environment is fueled by this horrible vicious cycle that rewards rage and extreme content. And yes, there's a good body of evidence that talks about the degree to which outrage wins online. This was a study that was in Science, again, just last year, highlighting this. It's gotten so bad that rage and polarization has become an industry, and you get individuals from all over the world pretending they're Americans, pretending they're Canadians, putting out rage-inducing content for the purpose of building brands and selling products, right? This has become, rage and lies has become an industry. This is one of my favorite studies that highlight how this plays out. 75, remember that number, 75% of the content. Now, this study was about Facebook, but there's been other studies on other platforms. 75% of the content on Facebook is shared without clicking through. Do you know what I mean by that? So in other words, people are sharing this content based solely on their kind of gut reaction, right? To the meme, to the headline. It's about emotion, right? So think about that. Our information environment is filled with content that is shared, right? It's actually, or you can say more broadly than that, our information environment is built on content that is shared as a result of an emotional response, right? Especially if that content plays to your preconceived notion, plays to your political beliefs, right? And yes, AI is going to make all of this worse. It already has. It already has. And no, you can't tell the difference. And I think it's interesting how many people think they can tell the difference. You can't. This was a study that came out last year, and AI is so much better already. This study's out of date, which found that people can't tell the difference between poetry written by AI and poetry written by a poet. In fact, you guys, humans, wait, oh, of course, I've got to reshare here. We're going to get through this. We're getting there, you guys. Of course, they found that humans actually prefer the content written by AI. And that brings me to my friend, Tom Brady. And why am I showing Tom Brady? Because I do think we all have to remember this impacts all of us. And I don't know if you guys remember this. This is the 2017 Super Bowl. It's just, let me put it this way. I've got 4 children. They're just all amazing, and a wife I do not deserve. That's the greatest day of my life. So Tom's down, it's 28-3, fourth quarter. He drives the Patriots back. They tie things up. He takes them into overtime, and they win. It's amazing. I'm getting misty telling you about it. Why am I bringing this up? Because icons and celebrities and influencers matter. They have an impact on all of us. If Tom told me to drink my urine that day, I probably would have drank my urine. This matters, right? And this is something we study at the Institute, the power of a story. And celebrities they're telling engaging stories, right? And an engaging anecdote story can shut down our ability to think scientifically, as this 2016 study highlights, right? And that's especially so if that story is scary, right? So a negative story shared on social media by a celebrity is kind of the perfect formula for spreading misinformation. Okay, gotta reshare again here. Just give me a second. And one of my favorite examples of that is this. The Nicki Minaj testicle story. I don't know if you guys remember that. Her friend's cousin's testicles became inflamed as a result of the COVID vaccines. And she shared this on X. She has tens of millions of followers and on other platforms. And it had a dramatic impact. I did a week of interviews about those testicles, right? And it is amazing, right? You think of the hundreds of millions of data points on safety and efficacy versus the testicles, and the testicles win, right? And this happens all the time, right? It happens all the time. Think about all the fear that is now circulating on social media about contraception and abortion. This is driven by anecdotes, usually, that aren't true, but it doesn't matter, right? Driven by anecdotes, often pushed by celebrities or at least influencers. Studies have consistently shown this. This is another, relatively recent study that found exactly that, and found also that the rage and hate and distrust towards abortion doctors, and I would argue healthcare system more broadly, driven by these kinds of scary narratives. And that brings me to the story of influencers. Now, by influencers, I think we need to conceive of them, from Tom Brady to Gwyneth Paltrow to Joe Rogan, etc. They are now the drivers of our public conversations, whether you're talking about health or politics. So this is a really interesting recent analysis done by McGill and I believe researchers in Toronto also, where they found exactly that. In Canada right now, influencers shape our political conversation more than media or even politicians, right? Oh my gosh, got to share again, which is incredible, a remarkable reality. And this is especially true for the young individuals. Influencers are winning the public discourse. And yes, again, not being partisan here, but I think it's important to emphasize the degree to which our current information environment is being completely owned by one side of the political spectrum. This was a study done by Media Matters that found exactly that, that the online content is almost completely dominated by one side of the political spectrum. And this, so it should be no surprise, right? It should be no surprise how dominant these false narratives about our health actually are, right? It's completely dominated by influencers, and those influencers reside on one side of the political environment. Again, not being partisan, and I'm going to come back to the degree to which I'm really trying not to be partisan, but what's happening here, it's about political identity, right? It's about your team, it's about your community, right? It might be an absurd lie, and you might even know it's an absurd lie, but it's your absurd lie. It's your team's absurd lie. So you want to embrace that. And I think the role of community is so we need to remember this, right? From Tom Brady and the Patriots, to Joe Rogan, to your political identity, it really matters. So you might be drawn to a particular community, especially in the health space, because you have some concern, you have some fear, you have some anxiety. And when you get to that community, you find identity, you find purpose, and you find belonging. Right? And we need to remember that. And I have to remind myself of it because I get so rage-filled about this, about my concerns about health misinformation. We have to remember that these communities are filling a role for those individuals. And we all do this. Again, I want to emphasize, I'm not trying not to be partisan. One of my favorite examples of the degree to which we all do it is the very recent week that Trump died. Do you guys remember this? He was, for a whole weekend, Trump was dead. And my family got into this, something's going on, something's fishy, right? We were all pulled, those on a different side of the political spectrum, into this echo chamber of misinformation about Trump's health, right? And I think it's really important to recognize that this can happen to all of us. I actually keep a list, and we can come back to it in the Q&A of misinformation that I've fallen for, right? Even if I've fallen for it only for a moment or so, I think it's important to remember that. But coming back to health, it's incredible the degree to which health misinformation now is about politics. People come from the ideological, this is a piece I wrote for NBC a while ago. People come for the ideological spin and they stay, and I don't mean this in a pejorative sense, we all do this, you stay despite the science-free lunacy because this is your team, right? And again, emphasizing how this isn't partisan, throughout time, those who are anti-science, those who are pushing questionable health advice, it shifts across the political spectrum. In the 1970s, for example, in the United States, late 60s, early 70s, it was the Democrats that were the party that was more likely to be anti-science. You think Nixon, Vietnam, Agent Orange, you get the idea. And now it's the Republicans, right? There's been a flip. And for most of my career, I got hate mail from the left. Like I've been at this for 3 decades. I got most of my hate mail from the left. And it's really been over the last 6-7 years that it started coming from the right. But yes, there's no doubt, study after study after study after study after study, this isn't me speculating, tells us right now, especially in Canada and the United States, it's coming from one side of the political spectrum. And that's, there's lots of really interesting research about how this is tied, not so much to conservatism, but more to populist views of politics. So you see that sort of the extremes of the political spectrum. But let's just look at some data about how bad it is in Canada. This was a piece I wrote for Healthy Debate last year. And again, I think we need to be careful not to overinterpret survey data. This was work done by Frank Graves, who I think does really good survey work. And it was about Alberta's last election. Look at these numbers. Look at these numbers. And there's been other studies that this maps onto, by the way. In Alberta, if you did not get the COVID vaccine, you are almost certainly conservative. 91% of those who did not get the COVID vaccine voted for the Conservative Party, and only 5% voted for the NDP. For those social scientists out there, you know this, you don't see those kind of numbers, right? That is just unbelievable partisan response. And there have been other studies that have looked at it nationally, same result. And this plays out in very fascinating ways, the degree to which this is about political identity. Again, as this audience probably knows, but worth reminding the team, the nocebo response. In other words, the idea that you expect a bad response from something. accounts for a huge percentage, and there's been a lot of research on this, a huge percentage of adverse responses to vaccination writ large, but especially the COVID vaccine. One study found about 76% of systemic adverse responses are the result of the nocebo, which is incredible, right? But other studies, this was a study that was in JAMA last year, found, look at this data is, I think, really telling. If you are a Republican in the United States, you're more likely to experience an adverse event and more likely to report it, right? That's how powerful a political identity is. It has an impact on your experience with vaccines, and I think probably healthcare more broadly. And this is important for so many reasons, understanding the role of politics, but also because we know this is going to make fighting misinformation more challenging. This was a study that came out, again, very recently, that highlights the degree to which this is true, and there have been a lot of other studies on this. As soon as a health or science topic becomes political, it becomes more sticky, the discourse is degraded, the discourse becomes more toxic. In addition to that, we also know that once a topic becomes political, and there's a lot of clinicians listening, no doubt, so you've experienced this, once it becomes about politics, your job becomes more difficult. The job of the healthcare system becomes more difficult. There becomes less compassion, less empathy, there's more frustration, and there's more resentment. So understanding this really, really matters. Now, I know I've already gone long, so I'll touch very quickly on these responses. Yes, teaching critical thinking skills, it really does matter. It can make a difference, as we've seen in many jurisdictions, including in Finland. There's been a growing body of evidence, a really nice, positive, it's good to have good news, right? Studies that show that teaching critical thinking really can make a difference in this space. This was a recent study that highlighted that case, but also show that critical thinking skills make the youth more socially responsible in their interactions online. We have to come at this from absolutely every direction. It's not going to be one solution. We have to pre-bunk, we have to debunk, we have to nudge, we have to regulate. There's been a growing body of evidence on the value of pre-bunking. In other words, just reminding people of the misinformation that might come and the kind of strategies that might be used. You set people up for the misinformation so they know it when they see it. They've found it in the context, for example, of election fraud. It really can make a difference. This is a recent one. For nudges, we want to invite people to pause, to reflect before they share content. Work by Gordon Pennycook and David Rand, which has been replicated by other laboratories, has found exactly that. If you can remind people to pause, even for a moment, they're called accuracy nudges, they're less likely to believe misinformation, less likely to share misinformation. And I think think of that 75% number. I think that's largely because you're asking people to disconnect from the emotional response to the content and engage a little bit of critical thinking. We also want to step back from the noise. I think this is really important. Put that phone down even for an evening. There's a growing body of evidence that this can really make a difference. Hard to study this well, but I think all the data points in that direction. It really makes a difference to your mental health, your well-being, but I also think to your critical thinking skills, because you come at content with a fresh mind. I know I'm going long, but I think this is a really important topic that I want to touch on. This is the concept of scientific consensus, because I think organizations like this can play a role. I think we need to have more organizations play a role here to talk about what the nature of the scientific consensus actually is. It's not a memo we get from the Star Chamber, right? It's not a memo we get from politicians about this is the meta-narrative. It's messy. It's always evolving. It's hundreds of studies that kind of point in a particular direction. If we teach people what the scientific consensus is, we can make a difference. And studies consistently show that, even for those who are skeptical. In fact, people like David Sweet, who runs the Clarity Foundation at UBC, tries to do exactly that. His most recent initiative, where he asked hundreds of pediatricians in BC, what are their views on the safety and efficacy of childhood vaccination, right? And what did he find? 100% of pediatricians that surveyed felt that the current childhood vaccinations are safe and effective. We need more of this kind of content. We've got to do this more often. We're seeing this reference to scientific consensus have an impact with things like climate change. It really can make a difference. They've done it with fluoride, GMOs. We all need to speak up. And we've seen that happen recently in the pushback to the debacle, the Tylenol debacle. We saw institutions around the world, countries, healthcare institutions, scientific organizations push back against the noise. This was a wonderful good news story. We need more of this. We need more of this. The bad news is, despite that pushback, even in this space, we see that 41% of parents in the United States right now, a very recent survey, believe that the Tylenol has some relationship to autism. And yes, there's a political element to this. But the good news is, I think, but for that universal response to the noise, to the debunk, these numbers would have been even worse. As Heidi Larson and her colleague highlighted, what is required right now is consistent evidence-based messaging from the world's most influential actors. We all need to stand up. We all need to try to make a difference. I know it feels like it doesn't make a difference, but it really, really does. Factual knowledge can have a meaningful impact even in these polarized times. This is our effort to do it. It's called #ScienceUpFirst. We'd love to have everyone join us on your favorite social media platforms. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very, very much for this opportunity. I apologize for going a little bit long. I apologize for my PowerPoint struggles, but I'll end with my two favorite words. Go science. Thanks very, very much, guys.
Thank you so much, Timothy Caulfield, everyone. Wow, what a talk. Some great anecdotes and great advice, and just so grateful to have you join us and share both your experience and your insight, and really on the front lines of this ongoing fight against misinformation. So thank you so much. And we had a bit of extra time at the beginning, so we actually are only 1 minute over, so no need to apologize there. I will remind everyone, if you have questions today, we're going to have Professor Caulfield and others who are speaking join us at the end for a panel discussion, Q&A session. So if you can follow the link to the Slido to send in your questions. We're going to move into our first research in action presentation. We have Dr. Alistair McAlpine, who is a pediatric infectious diseases clinician at BC Children's Hospital. He's the director of PHSA's Antimicrobial Stewardship Program, a researcher at the Vaccine Evaluation Center, and a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Pediatrics at the University of British Columbia. Alistair moved to Vancouver from Cape Town, South Africa in 2018 for a fellowship at BC Children's, and in 2024 he published a memoir of his experience as a palliative pediatrician titled Prescription Ice Cream, A Doctor's Journey to Discover What Matters. He's very active on social media. His posts get 200 million views per year. He's a husband, father, ultra-distance marathon runner, and much to his wife's dismay, an enthusiastic listener of death metal music. So Dr. McAlpine, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And he's going to present to us about TikTok, from the TikTok to the waiting room, how misinformation is affecting frontline clinicians. Over to you.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Let me just, can everybody see that? Is that working well? I know Tim had some struggles. Assume that that's okay. So yeah, following Tim is a tough act, and I don't have his credentials, but like him, I spend too much time probably online, and I do have a lot of experience with dealing with anti-vaccine misinformation. And the goal of my talk today is really to provide some insight into what it's like for those of us on the front line and how we're managing the rise in misinformation and how it's affecting those of us who are seeing patients, having to answer questions, deal with parents in this heavily politicized and often quite tense and fiery environment. So So the goals for this chat is to show how social media has evolved to become a medical misinformation super spreader. I'll try not to repeat too much of what Tim said, but show it from a sort of a clinical lens. Highlight some of the challenges that physicians and other healthcare workers face on social media, and then demonstrate how this misinformation has real world consequences for those of us on the front line. And I'm sure most of the people on this call probably have their own experiences that they could add. So the first
Dr.
question is,
McAlpine,
yeah.
I'm just wondering, I think we're seeing your notes there on your slide. Is
Oh,
there a way to switch
how
into...
does that look better?
Perfect. Thanks so
Oh,
much. Sorry to
great,
jump in.
amazing. Yeah, there were no hidden notes. So the first question that we have to ask is like, do physicians actually use social media? And the answer is surprisingly not as much as you might think. And there are a bunch of reasons for that. There's fear about saying something wrong, facing discipline from their employer, not wanting to attract too much heat, not wanting to negatively affect patients. But when the study was done in JAMA in 2021, it was found that the average physician had 99 followers on social media, that 90% of them were posting 0 times per month. They may have been reading, but they weren't posting. And that the most widely used app was Facebook. For anyone who uses social media, they'll know that Facebook is now the app of kind of old people and uncool people. The youth do not use Facebook at all. It has been replaced by Instagram and TikTok for the youth, and by Twitter or X for professionals. And most of the physicians said that more than half of them noted that they use it to learn, but did not use their social media accounts to try to educate, presumably because of the potential heat that they would face. And then around 2022, things changed in the social media space. Elon Musk acquired control of Twitter in October of 2022, and he immediately announced that censorship was going to end, that dissent and contrary views would no longer be silenced, and that pretty much anyone could say whatever they wanted, including pretty awful hate speech, and the consequences would be minimal. And as a result, misinformation unsurprisingly flourished. Musk said that he would provide a content moderation council to moderate the content, but he ended up firing 75% of the Twitter workforce, and this content moderation council has never been formed. Further to that, notorious misinformation accounts that had been banned under the previous Twitter regime were unbanned, and so a bunch of really bad actors came back into the fold. People like Alex Jones, who had spread horrible misinformation about the Sandy Hook massacre. Alex Berenson, named the internet's wrongest man for the COVID-19 pandemic, and a bunch of other people were allowed back in and were allowed to tweet unhindered. In 2023, misleading posts were no longer removed by Twitter, and there was a reliance on community notes, which is all good and well in theory, but the truth is community notes could not keep up with the barrage of misinformation, and often would only be added on to misleading tweets many days after they appeared, and the damage had already been done. And so mis and disinformation soared, as Tim had noted, and studies showed that Twitter and X had become, Musk renamed Twitter X because he's obsessed with the symbol, had become the largest spreader of that misinformation. And then with the changing of the political tides, Facebook and Instagram followed suit. And in January of this year, post the Trump presidency win, probably to engender favor with the Trump presidency itself, Mark Zuckerberg of Meta and Instagram announced that social media would walk back the limited moderation that they had. He promised to replace it with a community-style notes moderation, but as of yet, this has not occurred. And so now there is simply no moderation occurring on any of the Meta platforms, which includes WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook. And then again, as Tim has noted, the algorithms themselves reward extreme views. I won't go over this again, but what has happened in the interim is that Twitter and X has monetized its tweets, and that has only further fueled the algorithm because engagement is now rewarded. And so when, the goal now is to get as much engagement as possible, rage, is a good form of engagement. And so what's happened is that people now click on these tweets because they're just so full of rage. How can you possibly say this awful thing? And then the algorithm notes that and then starts sending more of that user's tweets your way. And then similar content based on that user. And so in your efforts to fight vaccine misinformation, say, you now get exposed to more and more. You don't even want to see what my X feed is like. It's just a cesspit of nonsense. And that's because the algorithm thinks that I'm interested in anti-vaccine misinformation. And so what's happened is rage bait thrives. People get steered down rabbit holes that they may have previously avoided. And once you've gone down a rabbit hole, it's extremely difficult to climb back out. And again, as Tim has noted, AI is only making things worse because it's now able to personally target you based on your history, your hopes, your dreams, your fears, and expectations, and send content your way designed to provoke extreme reactions. So what is the temperature then for clinicians on social media? This was in 2023, sort of during the COVID pandemic, and 66% of physicians reported some form of harassment on social media. And of these, 88% reported that harassment due to advocacy of science. Sadly, but perhaps predictably, 45% of the harassment was on the basis of gender. So our female colleagues got it a lot more than the males did. And 27% was race or ethnicity, and 13% based on sexual orientation or gender. Again, unsurprisingly, women more than men, and non-white colleagues more than white colleagues. And death threats were frequently included. And for those wondering, the threat is real. A bunch of our colleagues received real and imminent death threats, including Nicole Baldwin in the States, who made a cute little TikTok about vaccines preventing illness and not causing autism. Peter Hotez in Texas, and a whole bunch, including myself, regularly face comments that, dead doctors don't lie, which is a pretty scary thing. And no matter how thick a skin you have, and no matter how much you may not believe this, trust me, when you receive your first death threat, it's really, really chilling. And it's not something that you ever forget. And it certainly has a chilling effect. You do think to yourself, is this worth it? Should I really continue posting? Should I not just go out and touch grass, perhaps? So unsurprisingly, physicians leave. There's been a huge exodus. Physicians have said, we don't want this anymore. We don't want mindless bots telling us that we are, awful people and going to face Nuremberg 2.0. And there has been an exodus of physicians from X to various alternatives. The big one for a while was Blue Sky. But what is unsurprising is that the physician presence on Twitter or X has gone down markedly and has been replaced to a large extent by simply more misinformation. If nature abhors a vacuum, social media does as well. And if good actors leave a space, it is promptly filled by bad ones. So we're in a place at the moment where, despite there being alternatives, unfortunately, Twitter and X remains the site of choice, not for the youth who sit mostly on Instagram and TikTok. But if you're interested in politicians, breaking news, and want real interactions, unfortunately, it is still the main site of choice. It's where the majority of US politicians put forward their views. It's where healthcare workers do. It is still kind of the place to be, sadly. Alternatives like Threads, Mastodon, and Blue Sky have not really taken off to the same extent, and the youth remain largely indifferent to these and continue to use Instagram and TikTok. And for whatever reason, most doctors are just not comfortable dancing on TikTok, and so it remains an unexplored space. And so the result of all of this, predictably, is an explosion of misinformation in the health space. We've seen a rise of more than 500% in over 5 years. And for anyone following, misinformation, as Tim noted, has now gone mainstream. The screenshot I put on this would not have been out of place on a hardcore anti-vax website a few years ago, and is now the front line of the CDC, claim that vaccines do not cause autism is not evidence-based. and the vaccines do not cause autism has a little asterisk, and RFK has furiously typed there at the bottom that the only reason he didn't remove it is because he made a promise to the Secretary of Health, Bill, I can't remember his name, his last name, when he voted for him to become the head of HHS. So I suspect that will not last too much longer. And so now what happens is anti-vaccine advocates and misinformation peddlers now occupy key roles in the Trump administration. We've got Dr. Oz, who a few years ago was promoting raspberry ketones as a miracle weight loss cure and green coffee beans, now, in charge of Medicaid. Jay Bhattacharya, who infamously chaired the Great Barrington Declaration, which advised a let her rip strategy for COVID, is now the head of the NIH. And Robert F. Kennedy himself is the head of HHS. And the notion that these guys are pulling the main levers of health is simply astonishing. And so the effect on waiting rooms is real. And if you have a look at the graph there, which shows sort of the idea of vaccine acceptance with full acceptance on the left and refusal on the right, what we see, and I don't want to overstate this, the majority of Canadian parents still believe in vaccination, and the numbers do support that. But there has been a subtle shift to the right. And so what we've seen is fewer people are fully accepting now. More people fall into the hesitant group. And so previously, people who may have been fully accepting are now starting to ask questions. Some of the hesitant group have moved into the outright refusal group, and the refusal group has got bigger. And so what we're seeing as a result of this is that this small but subtle shift is resulting in more delayed vaccines, more skipped vaccines, and more questions for physicians on the front line. And the numbers are bearing this out. If we look at the vaccination rates for the 2023-2024 season, the overall coverage was 65%, which is down from 70 in 2022. Sorry, and that's not for influenza. That was for overall childhood vaccination. So the rate has dropped by 5%. And if we look at influenza vaccination across the board, the numbers have dropped from 41% for the 6 to 4 month age group, 31% from 35% to the 5 to 11-year-olds, and 27% from 28% from the 12 to 17-year-olds. Again, not huge numbers, but it's enough of a trend that we're beginning to see real problems, especially when we rely on herd immunity to keep serious infections at bay. Obviously, herd immunity for things like measles is usually around 90 to 95%. And so the result is that we've had multiple measles outbreaks in BC. Canada has lost its measles-free status, and we're not going to get it back anytime soon, with the US likely to follow suit next year. And now we're beginning to have real problems in the front line, because every child with a rash is now considered a possible measles case. Has to be isolated into airborne precautions. Additional testing has to be done. Concerns about who may have been exposed while they were sitting in the waiting room. And all of this is extremely time-consuming for healthcare professionals, because debunking misinformation is much harder than creating it, so-called Brandolini's BS law. Busy ER staff now have to have long discussions about, for example, tetanus vaccinations and immune globulins in unimmunized children who have wounds, which we never used to have to do before. And convincing vaccine-hesitant parents often takes hours and hours of counseling, and even then has only variable success. And even confident parents are now having doubts like, do I really need the polio shot? It's harmful to patients, coming right to the end, Josh, because we now need to have a broader differential to necessitate additional invasive investigations. Things like Haemophilus meningitis, which was not a thing while I was a trainee, is now back on the menu, requiring lumbar punctures to exclude. Broader spectrum antimicrobials are now needed to cover vaccine-preventable bacteria. An example is using cefuroxime instead of cefazolin for osteomyelitis. The higher rates of resistance necessitate additional antibiotics, because most of the resistance types are covered by some of the PCV strains. If someone has not been vaccinated, we cannot be sure that they're covered anymore. And then parents hesitant about vaccines may be hesitant about other medical interventions, such as IV antibiotics. And so the summary, sadly, is that misinformation is growing online and is aided by social media companies that have abandoned moderation. The algorithms reward rage bait, and healthcare workers are leaving the social media space to avoid harassment. And this is translating to a small but meaningful decline in overall vaccination rates with the loss of herd immunity. And this results in an increased burden on all of us who are working on the front line. And sadly, the situation as it stands is only likely to get worse before it gets better. I don't share all of Tim's optimism about the ways we are fighting back, but we do need to find a way to fight back because the situation cannot continue. So on that slightly somber note, I'd like to say thank you very much indeed for your time, and I will stop sharing my screen at this stage.
Thanks so much, Dr. McAlpine. Sobering, but very important, and glad to hear from a frontline clinician just about that perspective, just how important this is, how important it is to continue to push back. We have another, our second and final research in action presentation. I'll jump right into it so we can keep moving along and get into our panel discussion afterwards. Up next is Aishwarya Nagar, a senior analyst at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security and a research associate in the Department of Environmental Health and Engineering at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Currently, her work focuses on improving regional public health preparedness and response in the United States, building trust in public health, and addressing misleading health rumors in the US, and countering information manipulation campaigns about chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats. She is the lead author of the Practical Playbook for Addressing Health Rumors, has developed resources for the Tackling Rumors and Understanding and Strengthening Trust in Public Health project, and is part of the Region 3 Center for Public Health Preparedness and Response. Aishwarya is going to talk to us about managing harmful health rumors that make it hard for us to prepare for and respond to public health emergencies. Over to you, Aishwarya.
Thank you so much. I'm learning so much from everyone, and hopefully this is as empowering and inspiring as it is depressing, if not more. But thank you so much for this opportunity to chat with all of you. I'm here to talk about some really cool work that my team at Hopkins has been doing with local health departments and everyday health practitioners, public health practitioners who are doing their very best to prepare for and respond to public health emergencies. I'm coming in live from Baltimore, Maryland, and just excited to be here and chat with all of you. I'll be talking about how local health departments manage harmful health rumors that make it hard for us to prepare for and respond to public health emergencies. Just because I know I'm going to get so lost, I'm going to put all of my links in chat. And I loved when everyone was reacting with emojis. So if anything we're talking about makes you feel some type of way, please share the most relevant emoji. It really helps me understand where you're at with the content that we're talking about today. So we're gonna jump right in. I want to start by saying that the work that I'm going to talk about today builds on some of the CDC funded work that our team, the Center for Health Security. So just to say that is the lens that I'll be using in this conversation, health security. Our team has been working on a bunch of CDC funded projects aiming to tackle rumors and understand and strengthen trust in public health. So thinking about what kinds of rumors keep coming up over and over again, what kinds of approaches are there out there to tackle these rumors, and then ultimately, how do we build trust in public health, especially during public health emergencies? Also to say that this conversation builds on the back of such a rich scholarship in the risk and health communication space. So this is by no means the thing that'll change your life, but it's amazing that there is such a rich community talking about this ever-present but evolving topic. Really, the work we do comes from a place of feeling like this all the time. The public health practitioners that we work with are just living in this environment of constant chaos. Not really, we don't have all the funding and the time in the world to do all of the things it is that we need to do, especially when it comes to preparing for and responding to public health emergencies. So instead, the onslaught of rumors, misinformation, and disinformation just sort of leaves us feeling like this. And there is a very strong and urgent need for strategies and just ways to kind of equip our communications workforce for confronting this kind of constant issue of misleading and harmful rumors that make it hard for folks to do their jobs. Want to also start by saying that confronting rumors in the public health emergency preparedness and response world, it's about more than just mis and disinformation. Usually, at the onset of a public health emergency, or even just throughout, we'll see questions and concerns from people who are curious about what's going on. If some of these questions and concerns go unanswered, then there are information voids that form, which is perfect for a nefarious actor or even a well-meaning one to fill with weird, false, misleading, harmful claims. When that festers, then we get rumors, which I want to say there's nothing inherently bad about rumors. It's how we make sense of the world around us. At the beginning of an emergency, things might be true, partially true, or completely false. Often we don't know. We have to do more work to find out if it's really mis and disinformation. But eventually, rumors can fester into false narratives, and those are harder to address and harder to unstick from people's minds, especially when we are working in a space like a local health department. The truth of the matter, as our other speakers have said, is that rumors do hurt our ability to prepare for and respond to public health emergencies, which is just a part of the totality of effects they have on our health and well-being. These are just some headlines from the US from the past 2 years about the ways in which rumors, mis, and disinformation have been harming people's health. They reduce trust in public health authorities and public health guidance. They influence how people behave. They lead to negative health outcomes in a lot of cases and just tangible harms on people's lives. So there's a really massive case to be made that the next time we have a public health emergency that rolls around, we have to be ready to confront misleading and harmful health rumors because they are going to show up. I want to talk about some of the work we've been doing as part of a CDC-funded Public Health Preparedness and Response Center in Region 3. It's shown on the screen here. It's one of 10 regional centers that's working on incorporating evidence-based strategies and interventions into improving public health emergency preparedness and response. For our center, we're focusing on three pillars, one of which is communication. So we surveyed this really large group of regional partners, and they said, look, we really need to equip health departments with the ability to better respond to misleading and harmful rumors. We just can't sit on this anymore. We need to do something about it. So our team worked with different health departments in developing an intervention, it's the public health way of talking about it, but really it's just really strategic conversations we've been having with state and county health departments, working with them on developing a strategic plan or a plan of action, really, on countering misleading health rumors that make it hard for them to do their job. So this usually it's communications professionals in the rooms, some folks who work with community partners, folks from different departments, not just folks who work with others in the health department. It's a really good group of people that's in the room. And what we do is we host this intervention. As part of this intervention, we host an interactive 1.5 hour strategic planning session, which is didactic in part and also really, really interactive because we're asking people to come to the table with the rumors that are most relevant to them. And then let's work through this strategically. And then we follow these health departments' journey over the course of the next 3 months as they finalize and implement their plan of action. And we provide as much technical assistance as is requested. Really, the idea is that it's really scary and stressful and chaotic to deal with misleading and harmful health rumors. In the moment when you're confronting them, it's tough to pick which way we're going to go, what we're going to do, especially if we want to do something strategically and very sort of like in a streamlined manner. So our idea is that through this intervention, if we equip health departments with, we provide tools and we equip them with the ability to kind of come up with a strategic plan of action in the moment, then it builds their confidence in countering misleading and harmful health rumors. It builds their capabilities, their sense of preparedness, and their knowledge to do so well. And in the long run, it would mean better messages going out to the public before, during, and after public health emergencies, better health outcomes, and healthier behaviors in our kind of communities, better, richer information out there. So that's sort of the conceptual model underpinning this work. So in the strategic planning sessions, which are honestly so much fun, people come up, a side note, people come up with the craziest rumors. Our first question we ask everyone is, what's the weirdest rumor you've come across? And I know you can't put anything in chat, but if there's an emoji that encapsulates a very weird rumor you've heard recently, I need you to find it and I need you to share it right now. Because people really do come up with the darndest things. But during these sessions, after sort of we get to know each other and we start chatting, a poop emoji. Okay, I have follow-up questions. Anyway, the session that we have with folks, the didactic portions, is rooted in this practical playbook for addressing health rumors. So you can scan this QR code or there's a link in chat. And really, this playbook was so much fun to work on, but it's a playbook that provides guidance on ways public health and medical professionals can prepare for health-related rumors, doing things like establishing a social listening mechanism or some way to look out for what kinds of chicken? Oh, my ADHD is not compatible with this, but I'm loving the emojis here. But koala. Anyway, we might do things like coming up with really good social listening mechanisms and trying to look out for all sorts of rumors that are affecting our communities during an onset of a public health emergency. The playbook has guidance around making decisions for when to act to address misleading rumors because not all rumors are worth responding to. And we probably shouldn't be responding to every single rumor out there, especially if we don't have all the money and the time in the world to do this work. There's guidance to help folks determine which actions to take to address misleading rumors. Again, there's just so much work that's been done out there to think about how we counter rumors. So it's a matter of really thinking about what do I pick and how do I implement it well. We work with folks on developing messages to address these misleading rumors and then gathering feedback on those messages to see whether they had their intended impact or even an impact. The take action section is always the most interesting place where conversation happens. We walk people through these steps. So we start by helping folks identify the type of rumor that's spreading. And this is because in some of the research we've been doing, and hopefully my paper on this comes out soon, we realize that the same types of rumors keep coming up over and over again, regardless of the public health emergency we're experiencing. This is something we've seen by reviewing rumors that came up during past public health emergencies. You know, there's always something that's rooted in a sociocultural narrative that's sort of always there underlying, but a new public health emergency is fertile ground to bring up a certain sociopolitical agenda. Or it might be rooted in the way people think or the cognitive processes they use to understand the information that they're receiving. You know, folks may jump to conclusions, they may trust some credible actors over others because of just how we think about them. Or these rumors might be rooted in how we in public health communicate with people or how governments communicate with people. And so we do this mostly to emphasize that not all rumors demand the same response. For example, if you've ever tried to debunk a conspiracy theorist, you know that they're just going to dig their heels in even harder. So in a case like that, it's more important to foster relationships and work through sort of what is the core of these rumors, these beliefs, than to be like, you're wrong. That's it. Then we work with folks on characterizing their priority audiences, thinking about our communications goals, picking an actual approach, thinking about how we'll communicate with people, which trusted messengers we might involve, and then choosing strategic ways to frame our message. For example, moral reframing is a fantastic strategy. That's where we align our messages with the morals, values, and beliefs of our audiences. So just it has a better chance of being taken up by them. And then finally, we work with folks on creating and disseminating their messages using good practices in terms of tone or language or structure. When folks are choosing an action approach, we usually talk about it from a perspective of you might think about at what level you want to act. So this is an adapted socioecological model. It's based on a study that I've also linked in chat, also available here, where if we want to sort of intervene at the point of people interfacing with the information that they're receiving, then we might follow a certain set of actions. Or if we really want to focus on the individual and their perceptions and beliefs and actions, then that's a different set of approaches we might think about. If we're focusing on the interpersonal and community level, then something like community engagement is very helpful. Whereas if really we're thinking of the institutional structural level, then we might want to think about approaches like social media content policies. We've we've talked about that recently. Or thinking about standards for journalists and fact checkers when they are trying to communicate with people, especially at the onset of a public health emergency. But we know people don't have all the time and money in the world, so we focus our strategic planning sessions on these 6 actions, which we think are things that folks are already probably doing or are kind of feasible for them to do. So we know that public health folks and health departments are almost always amplifying accurate information that's already out there or filling information voids with accurate information. We see folks leveraging trusted messengers like physicians, like faith leaders, like community-based organizations to sort of disseminate good messages and engage in communities meaningfully. Um, of course, I think the instinct when you come across a rumor and then you're thinking, this doesn't sound right, is to say you're wrong. And that's not always the approach that works. In fact, I don't think it's ever worked, but there is an art to debunking, right? We want to start with talking about what the facts are, warning people that they're about to hear something false, explaining what the fallacy is, and then kind of wrapping up again with what the facts are. There's an art to it. So we talk a little bit about that. Folks often don't know too much about pre-bunking and inoculation, so we have a lot of fun chatting about this action approach. And this is where we forewarn people about the false claims or misinformation they're about to come across. We reduce their susceptibility to believing in these false claims, and we build people's resilience to false claims. And then finally, it's always great to work with folks on improving health and science literacy, which could look like helping folks understand common logical fallacies that show up in news media or tactics that are used to deceive them, or helping them understand complex scientific information, especially in the face of evolving guidance. And it's always great to work with folks on acknowledging uncertainty. I don't think it's something we always do very well, and to prepare our communities for evolving guidance. So when we chat with folks, we emphasize that it's always good to very transparently talk about what we know, what we don't know, and what we're doing to find out what we don't know. I do want to acknowledge, though, science is nuanced, especially at the beginning of a public health emergency. We don't know, sometimes we don't know what the facts are. And so it's not as simple as being like, this is true, this is false. There is gray area in the middle, and I don't think we do a good job of wrangling that gray area. So, this is not something that I have concrete guidance to share with health departments on, but it's always amazing to hear about their experiences with navigating that uncertainty. We've had a fantastic time, even though, again, it is kind of both impressive or inspiring and depressing to talk about this. We found it really motivating to work with folks, our health departments, on countering misleading and harmful health rumors over the past year. We've organized 9 sessions, engaged 126 attendees, and 36 communities all over the United States, actually. There was interest beyond just our region. So we've gone and done some in-person sessions. We've been at conferences. If any of you are coming to the Prep Summit in Baltimore, then come say hi. We can talk about this more. We've done webinars, but really at the root of it, what we've learned is that in our interactive sessions, folks have shown gains after going through this entire intervention in their knowledge of approaches to counter harmful rumors. And they've attributed this knowledge to the intervention. They feel more prepared to counter rumors generally, but also to actually implement these rumors or rumor management approaches in the future. They're more likely to counter rumors. They are more capable of it. They're interested in translating intention to future actions. They want to pursue partnerships and joint communication strategies. This was a really cool one to see. They feel more confident around managing rumors, and they want to spur organizational change. So after the strategic planning session, they can take this plan of action or any ideas they have to their leadership and say, look, I think we need to do things differently to just sort of gain more ground in countering rumors or just managing rumors. I am really inspired by the people we work with. They do incredible work, especially as the landscape of public health is constantly changing in the US. So I just want to give a shout out to these folks who are really in the trenches of public health, for whom just understanding what are my options and how can I navigate these options, that in itself is a really valuable relationship to be building and work to be doing. Other work we've done has been focusing on building trust in science and public health. Here's a QR code for a checklist that we worked on. This was after interviewing so many different public health practitioners all over the United States. And there's so much incredible guidance here, but really if we're thinking about how we want to build trust in public health, I want to leave us with some of these points that we might think more about, which is we really need to do more about helping people understand what public health is. It's not enough to say like incidence and prevalence when we're talking about a new outbreak or whatever is going on out there. We really have to help people understand what we think are simple but might actually be really complex concepts. We need to help people grasp, what is an emergency use authorization? How can I report vaccine side effects? That sort of thing. We also really do need to understand communities' histories with public health, since not everyone has a reason to be like trusting public health. Public health and, the kind of governments with which it is associated do have a history of harming people in the past. So this relationship is so important to disentangle, and then to repair, or at least acknowledge these fractures. We could be doing more to promote shared decision making. So instead of you go do this, it's more of a let's figure out what works for your community. That's a shared process. I think that would be better practice for us to follow. And then, as tempting as it is for us to be like, well, the science doesn't support it, we do have to refrain from dismissing alternative practices outright. Of course, unless they're harming people. But this is something we could do better about. And then always, it's so good to actually be present in the communities where we're doing our work and be a reliable and dependable source. We like to talk about it as like, your one friend who just sort of like comes out of nowhere is like, hey, can you give me money? And you're like, do you wanna like talk to me first? You wanna sound like a hey? Like you are less inclined to sort of go all in for that friend rather than like folks you actually are building relationships and you have a history of trust with. At least that's the case for me. But yeah, so those are some things that we can do to build trust in public health. Of course, it's more complicated than that. I would say that it's important to do something, anything, and to do what we can in our circles and in our spheres of influence. That's sort of always the thing that I want folks to leave these conversations with, is that we do have power to do something about this, and we could start with wherever. Finally, we have been funded to do work around this, really implementing it in specific communities and seeing how we can counter misleading and harmful health rumors in a way that like actually meets the goals and needs of specific health departments and their community partners. So if you're interested in this work, if you're interested in implementing practical approaches to counter rumors in your health department or in your context, hit me up, reach out to me. This is my email. We'll see where it goes. I'd be really excited to just even talk about this with more people. But thank you so much for this time. And again, massive shout out to all the health departments out there who are in the trenches of this work. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ashwarya. It's great to hear from you, especially, to get that perspective on what's happening in the US right now. It's certainly frightening for a lot of us here in Canada, and I'm sure around the world as well. And I really like that framing of, like that word misinformation gets so politicized, and to just frame that as, these are health rumors. And it's like, just comes at you, we come at it from such a different perspective, looking at it that way. So yeah, that is the end of today's presentations. We're going to move quickly into the Q&A and panel discussion. We have that QR code for questions on Slido. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can, and have the presenters respond to the more the upvoted ones, and like we're trying to group them together as well, so we'll cover as many topics as possible. We do have a fourth panelist joining today's discussion who haven't presented yet today, so I will just introduce Lucas Wilson. Lucas is a white settler of Scottish ancestry living on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. He began his career in youth work, supporting Two-Spirit LGBTQ+ youth to help them find the resources they need to thrive. This work continues to guide Lucas' public health practice in principles of health equity, inclusivity, compassion, anti-oppression, and person-centered care. Lucas has over 10 years of experience working in gender-affirming system navigation, trans health education, and health systems improvement. As the provincial lead for partnerships and networks at TransCare BC, he is grateful to work alongside a team that strives to strengthen this system of care, to bring care closer to home wherever possible for trans, two-spirit, and non-binary people in BC. Lucas's roles have involved coordinating care for trans and gender diverse populations, facilitating workshops and drop-ins, providing advocacy and system navigation support, and training youth facilitators. Lucas has an undergraduate and graduate degree at Simon Fraser University, where he obtained a master's in public health. Lucas, thank you for joining today's panel. And to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about how misinformation has impacted your work with Transcare BC? And maybe tell us how the We Are Allies campaign has responded to misinformation when it comes to gender affirming care in the research space.
Sure. Thank you so much, Josh. I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm so thankful to have been here for the past possibly 2 hours now. Just learning so much about misinformation and the ways we can address it. So as mentioned in my intro, and thank you for reading that out. I work for Transcare BC, which is a program of PHSA. And so our role is in increasing access to care for trans, two-spirit, non-binary people in BC, and we've certainly seen misinformation have a role in the ways that people access care and also the ways that people are able to feel safe in their communities. As I'm sure many folks in here are probably aware. There's growing anti-trans rhetoric and misinformation about gender affirming care that's proliferated not just in Canada, but in the US and also around the world. And we see the effects of that having real impacts on trans, two-spirit, non-binary people and their families. And in some cases, this has been stopping care, making care harder to access. Physicians and clinicians retreating from care is also a very real effect of the misinformation in the space. And so our program recognizing this sort of upswing in the prevalence of this anti-trans rhetoric and this misinformation about what gender affirming care is specifically for youth and young people. We started a campaign called We Are Allies, funded by Health Canada. 2 years ago now, and the focus of that campaign is on addressing mis and disinformation in the spaces where it is sort of spreading and most common. So a lot of that's online, but a lot of that is also in sort of education or care settings where folks may be coming across information, and if they're new to the topic of gender affirming care, which a lot of people are, and new to the topic of gender diversity, they may encounter information and may not know what to think. And so our campaign really aims to provide people with the evidence, with facts, and we talk about evidence from a very two-eyed scene approach. At least that's been our effort and intention, in that we evidence is both academic evidence, right? Like what do studies say about the safety of gender affirming care? What do professionals and clinicians involved in this care and clinical guidance say about this care? And how to support trans people, and also what do folks with folks who are traditional knowledge keepers say about this care in their community since time immemorial, and most importantly, what do individuals accessing this care say and feel about gender affirming care, and what do they say needs to happen to be supported in their communities. So I think somebody dropped a link to the website in the chat, and I'd urge people to go and check out the website. It's got a number of videos from folks with direct experience, both clinicians, trans, spirit, non-binary people and their families, as well as knowledge keepers, and very handy dandy research summaries that give you a quick look at what the current research says about these topics related to gender affirming care and gender diversity. Thanks for giving me a bit of a spot to speak about this. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks so much for joining us, Lucas. Yeah, quite a few questions here on the Slido. The first one I'm seeing up at the top, I'll invite the other presenters to raise their hands if they want to jump in. When correcting medical misinformation, we can come across with, quote, intellectual arrogance, unquote, hurting our credibility. Do you have any advice on how to avoid that? It also feels like there's a paradox. If a scientist makes an unintentional or intentional mistake, people treat them as completely untrustworthy. But when someone with no credentials spreads misinformation is proven wrong, it's often brushed off and there are no real consequences. Anyone want to jump in with that one?
I mean, I could take a stab. It's incredibly difficult, and I acknowledge that. And it feels like we're held to a different standard. But I could suggest that I'd be interested in Tim's views. I think it's important to always maintain humility, and to say like to the best of our knowledge or the science shows, so you're not saying like this is absolute truth from on high. What you can say is the best scientific evidence that we have right now shows blah blah blah. I know they may not be convinced by that, but at least you're telling the truth because we know that science does change, and acknowledging that the science does change and that's things that we used to do before we've changed based on changing science. So I think having a degree of humility is important, but also remaining firm and saying like, I'm not going to treat these two claims as sort of equal and both worthy of interrogation, and being firm and saying the science is extremely and overwhelmingly consistent that vaccines do not cause autism, that Tylenol does not cause autism, etc., while also maintaining a degree of humility and saying things do change and we're not always correct. And I have found that that sort of combination can be helpful, but also sometimes when you're dealing with someone who's really, really against you, nothing you say is really going to change their minds. And you have to decide in that instant whether it's worth actually engaging or not, because you may just be wasting your breath.
Yeah, I'll comment on that really quickly and just support everything that was said. And another approach that both my colleagues touched on in their presentations is this idea of talking about shared values. There is, it's hard to study this well, there's qualitative research on this, but there is some promising research that if you do that, so we all want healthy children, we want healthy families, we want to work with our community, this is our goal, and then you back into the area of disagreement. Some anecdotal evidence that works. There has been some research done on things from everything from GMOs. I think fluoride's another one they've done research on it. You really can make a difference. None of I know everyone knows this, but I'll say it anyway. None of these approaches are magic wands, right? We're talking about nudging, we're talking about, moving the dial and coming at this from absolutely every direction. I am going to use this as a this question as an opportunity to talk about the real tension that we all have, because our information environment is so noisy, it is so chaotic, it is so rage filled. To what degree do you lean into engage worthy content in order to get the good stuff across, right? So, I'll make jokes about pop culture, I'll make sports jokes, and sometimes maybe I lean into the our team versus your team in order to get engagement. But then are we becoming part of the problem, right? So it is I think we always need to reflect on our own tone and our own content. With Science Up First, we made a decision. We're going to be positive. We're going to work with communities to make content, let them co-create content. But we are putting ourselves at a disadvantage because you have, people leaning into the algorithms that like rage and fear and anger. So I think this is something we have to constantly revisit and reflect on.
I'd love to add to that really quickly. There's a fantastic resource out there. It's a toolkit called MisinfoRx. I've been meaning to email these folks for so long and just tell them what amazing work they're doing. And it builds on this idea of like building better relationships. So yes, while the instinct is we need to correct medical misinformation, of course, being right isn't enough. The toolkit has really great scripts on how do we identify and leverage shared values? How do we build a relationship instead of being like, this is what I think, get out. So I just want to shout out this one resource that has fantastic scripts to have that conversation meaningfully and not come across it and not be intellectually arrogant.
Thanks for that. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really like polarization becoming so common. It's really important that we talk about it a lot in other spaces, but just meeting people where they're at to start a conversation as opposed to starting confrontation. The next question I see here is, if you had to choose, should public health focus on swatting down misinformation or strengthening pre-bunking and critical thinking skills in the public? And a couple of similar questions. We may have the evidence or data to debunk the misinformation, but the other side also has their data. So it ends up being who wants to believe which data, and how do we deal with that? And a couple of things here. Additionally, is it encountering misinformation or believing misinformation that is most impacted by partisan response?
I'll take the last one. I think we need to be careful about the impact of mis and disinformation. By the way, I use misinformation as an umbrella term. Um, I because it's really complex. It's not like, oh, I heard this misinformation and now I believe this. I think the arrow of causation is way more complex than often portrayed, and I have to remind myself about this too. For example, if you're a super busy parent and you're in a jurisdiction where access to vaccines isn't easy, you might use misinformation to justify your inaction. Do you follow what I mean by that? So the misinformation didn't cause the hesitancy or your lack of uptake, but it just became part of the stew of justifications you use for yourself, but also for your community for not getting vaccinated. And the other thing that's fascinating is there's some research on this too, that people will be part of a community, and when you're part of that community, the same process happens. You want to stay part of that community, even if there's some cognitive dissonance, and you use misinformation to justify maintaining that belief. So, I have to remind myself, as I said, we have to be careful not to oversimplify the role of misinformation in the situation that we're now facing. And the other thing, and I talked about this a little bit in my presentation, is just the role of community. And we all do this. And the example I often use is, let's say I'm cheering for the Patriots. The ref is always wrong when they make a call against us, right? That's a good example of how powerful our own personal biases can be. And so we always have to remember that. And to the humility thing, I keep a list of things I've changed my mind on as a result of evolving evidence. And I genuinely keep a list of misinformation that I've fallen for. Sometimes it's just in the moment, but just to remind ourselves of how powerful our own biases and emotions can be.
Maybe I'll jump into the first bit of the question, which is kind of what should public health be focusing on? It's really difficult, and I think really it should be focusing on both, both pre and debunking. And I think part of the problem is that previously there's been this notion that we don't need to really debunk, that it's not worth it, that it doesn't help, and so maybe it's almost beneath us to be engaging. And I think truthfully that approach has clearly not worked, right? While sort of public health has remained, it feels a bit aloof from some of the stuff that's gone on. That has not helped quell the misinformation. In fact, it's only grown. And so I think there has to be some degree of pre and post, but I think that to sort of say, well, we should just not do one or the other hasn't worked, because if we look at this as sort of the battle of ideas or the changing of the tides, it's clear that we haven't done very well, right? Like we haven't done a great job, and that's because it's so difficult. Debunking is so much more difficult than creating misinformation. Staying above the fray is so much more difficult than getting into the muck and getting into the slinging match, and it's hard, but what we have done in the past has not worked, and I think we need to rethink both our pre and debunking strategies, because as it stands, we're not really winning the war.
Lucas or Ashwarya, did you have any thoughts on this question?
Briefly, sorry, I was looking for the hands up icon. I can't seem to find it, but thank you for prompting. I just wanted to add, from the perspective of misinformation that impacts particular populations, which and so I think in my work, we're very much dealing with misinformation that both impacts access to care, so is a public health concern, while also being a human rights issue, quite frankly, right? So, in terms of the role of public health, I think I agree with the sort of both and also the something we've learned through our campaign is from folks we've consulted with is how deeply important it is for organizations to show up and be communicating out, particularly about misinformation topics that impact equity-seeking populations. So what we found is that folks were reading some of the silence in terms of communicating out about gender-affirming care, especially as it's become more politicized and it's being used for political gain, and it is access to care. It is care. It is not political, but that folks were needing that reassurance, that continued commitment and reassurance from organizations that they trusted, and they needed that to see that communicated out into those spaces where they were accessing information, even if it was being met with conflict, but that showing up for folks who are communities directly impacted by the misinformation is just one thing that I keep pretty close to heart in all of this, and something that we've really learned and seeing have dramatic value in the campaign we've run.
Thanks for
I
that.
actually love that point about the silence. Recently, when we've had changing vaccine guidance in the US, I was trying to see what health departments were saying about it, how they were communicating about it with the public. And for understandable reasons, there was no communication. And we just heard repeatedly that like silence is not like silence is communicating something to me. So I think the baseline response of always focusing on pre-bunking, inoculating, building critical thinking skills is a great, like, we should be doing that all the time with swatting down specific false claims. I think it's really worth it if that claim is causing harm, if it is impacting, if it's disproportionately impacting certain people, or if it's like really targeted at people who are disproportionately likely to believe in it just because of like how it's targeting them. And also really popular claims, sometimes you do just have to address them. I do think there's a case to be made for swatting down some misinformation, but otherwise it's just noise and the complex ecosystem of information, and I don't know if that's always helpful.
Thanks for that. I have a question, and this is tagged for Ashwarya, but others feel free to jump in after. How do we harness rage to boost the reach of evidence-based information? There's plenty to be upset about here, and these issues have real-life consequences.
The thing I immediately thought of when you said that is we were talking to different health departments about what they found to work, and Baltimore City's health department has a really interesting history of using humor to communicate with the public and especially to counter misinformation. So some of their content during the pandemic was like sassy, like Wendy's style, like just takedowns of the people who are tweeting at them. And I think there is a place in this universe for harnessing witty rage, a humorous rage in that regard. However, most of the health departments we work with I don't think they have the luxury of rage just because the consequences are very steep. You risk alienating the people that you want to work with, that maybe trust you. And so I think maybe that's where more community partners and influencers can step in. I've really seen some science influencers I follow online really like directly enter rage territory as a way of communicating their profound like how personal it's gotten for them. And I do think rhetorically that's a fantastic tactic, not one that I think health departments always have the luxury of deploying.
Can I comment on that? Because I think about this all the time, and also to build on that, some health influencers are really good at it. Like my friend Jen Gunter, she's so good at really leaning into her rage. It's almost kind of funny. But I do try to use pop culture examples. So, and sports examples and or other, what recently I published, manspreading? Does everyone know what manspreading is? I did a post on the manosphere, which I do think is problematic and toxic and having real problems. And I put a post out about manspreading, and it got 500,000 views very, very quickly. And it's because people feel really strongly about it. And that was an entry point into discussions about the problems with the manosphere. Having said that, I got a formal complaint from a vice president of a university that post was beneath me, unbecoming. And it shows how there's this constant tension, right? That it exists in trying to get engagement, but reflecting on are you isolating a community and insulting them at the same time. So it is a battle, it's a tension, it's a balance, and we always have to think about how to move forward constructively.
Really quickly, do you think there's space for other emotions? Like I'm thinking of like the Marie Kondo sparking joy, or is it possible to use other emotions to grab people's attention in a more positive way? Or is that harnessing the rage really like the only thing that really gets the algorithm to work in your favor?
Well, there's actually fascinating research on this. It's the negativity bias, right? And it's a very extremely strong cognitive bias. And there's for one of a really interesting study I often referred to is how headlines have become more fearful, more focused on disgust, more focused on rage over the last 4 decades. I think they looked at 4 decades, and the headlines with joy and happiness have decreased. And that highlights the power of rage. This is an economic analysis, basically, right? How to create engagement. Having said all that, I think we can't let rage win. We can lean on joy, and I think just because it's difficult and just because it's hard doesn't mean we can't do it. So use humor, use art, use music, use all these strategies in order to uplift our content.
I'll just very jump in there and say I think there is the concept of righteous rage, being upset
Yeah.
at seeing, for example, a child dying of whooping cough when that could have been prevented. And you don't necessarily have to be trumping it with all capital letters and being furious. You can maintain a professional veneer while still conveying absolute fury that in 2025 we have children dying of vaccine preventable illness. It's a fine line to walk, and I'll be the first to admit I sometimes succumb to the rage. I'm not claiming to
Yeah.
be perfect at this, but I do think that being angry does not necessarily mean that you've kind of dropped all your professionalism. I think you can maintain both, and maybe that's something we could be aspiring to, because when professional organizations have these very dry responses, like, well, that does not get nearly the engagement of, say, a mother who says, I vaccinated my child, and the next day they just weren't the same, and they post memes and pictures. That is just far more likely to grab people than a sort of a very dry response from an organization. And so I think we do have to try balance our humanity and our true anger while not slipping into the dark side and becoming, Anakin Skywalker, to try and use some pop culture references.
Thanks for that. I'm going to jump into another question because we are getting short on time here. Laurie Brado asks for Alistair and Professor Caulfield. I'd love your perspective on Huberman, assuming referring to Andrew Huberman. What strikes me as more dangerous than influencers spreading disinformation is academic influencers spreading disinformation.
I'll be very brief. I'm not going to pull any punches. He drives me nuts. And I think he's a very good example of I call it science exploitation. So you use some real science, and you leverage that in order to push something that, when read in totality, is misleading. And he's very, very good at that. If you parse one of his podcasts, and I have tried to kind of analyze it, often every sentence is relatively accurate, but when taken together, it signals something that is not accurate. And it really does, of course, play to a brand. It plays to the manosphere. It plays to selling supplements. It plays to creating distrust with the scientific community. I find it very, very problematic. And I think it's a good example of the community needing to step up and say, this is what the body of evidence actually says in this space.
Don't know much else to add except that he's a good example of hubris, right? Like when he speaks
Yeah.
specifically on his small area of expertise, he's often okay, but he'll stray out into other things, diet and exercise and all these, which he clearly does not have the expertise on. And then he often just speaks a lot of nonsense. And so he leverages his sciencey sounding words and that he clearly knows the right phrases and stuff, and ends up causing a huge amount of harm. And in a weird way, guys like him, and I won't pull my punches either, are more dangerous than just Bob from the street, right? Who is spouting nonsense, because he is able to leverage his credentials and his sciencey sounding words to persuade more people. I hate it.
Same.
I'm going to jump into another question again, just in the interest of time. There's so much misinformation about IUDs, but also a real need for better pain management and more research on women's health. How to balance misinformation versus online advocacy? I'll invite either Lucas or Ashwarya if you want to jump in first.
Do you want to go? Okay. Well, I can kick off by saying that Agreed. It's a balance of wanting to provide accurate information, obviously, to help people make decisions that are right for them, while also having to actively counter just straight up falsehoods about something that we do have research and actual information on. I think the hard part is that a lot of mis and disinformation around sexual and reproductive health, like just in that world of gender identity and sexual and reproductive health, that whole ecosystem is rooted in really complex sociocultural factors that I think that's what we need to spend more time disentangling. Because again, it's like playing whack-a-mole. Like, yes, okay, fine, I've addressed this one rumor. Okay, fine, I've done this other one. I've done this. Today it's abortion. Tomorrow it's IUDs. Like the day after, it's about inclusive and gender conforming healthcare or gender affirming healthcare. Under all of it is something more sinister that I don't know if public health is. I mean, we should be part of that picture. We should be part of that story. But I think that's where we will have more momentum, is in shifting social norms.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially in the entanglement of all of these topics, like the overlap between access to abortion and gender affirming care. Like there is such a connection there, and then that it extends out to reproductive health care, and we sort of see them. We see them being access to care across these different sectors being attacked like almost in tandem, but it's, I mean, as you're saying, it is, to use a different metaphor, it's like you're like, oh, being sort of attacked on multiple sides, right? It's quite an effort being put forward to restrict this access to care and to manage bodies and to manage individuals' autonomy around their own bodies. And I think that yeah, the more we do, I think, to advocate together and to work together and communicating out, and the more we can build sort of solidarity between the different work we're doing, I think the better off we'll be. And if I may just reflect again, one part of our campaign was to connect with a number of different organizations from across Canada to make sure we're communicating out in unison with, I think we have about 80 plus organizations. And that was very purposeful. And I think it did us a lot of good in both protecting us as a program from not receiving too much heat, but also in strengthening the message. So I do think that that's important.
I'd love to add really quickly. I was when you said the thing about like under all of it, it's a lot of thought about our bodies. Is it, if we're thinking about really what some of these falsehoods are about, that's also where there's a lever of change for public health to intervene. Every time there's a new approved intervention, therapeutic, non-pharmaceutical, anything that's introduced, there will be doubts about it. We know this. This is there. We see rumors about this every single time something new is launched. Every single time there's a new vaccine. Also, I'm exaggerating. I don't know if it's literally every single time, but whenever
Yeah,
we have new
it
vaccine,
is.
you're right. Whenever we have a new public health emergency, there's always a rumor about infertility. Will the COVID
Yes.
vaccine make me infertile? And I get it. I also had that thought at some point. And underneath all of it is we want to protect our bodies. We want to know that the things that are being recommended to us are safe, that we will actually live healthy lives with them, that they're not harming us. So again, going under the surface and thinking about what it is that people are actually asking, I think that's somewhere we will make more headway rather than just being like, get a load of this person asking about infertility. There's like a real concern there that is not worth dismissing.
Recognizing that we are at time, I do want to give Dr. McAlpine and Timothy Caulfield a chance to weigh in on that question if you like, and I will try to squeeze one more in. If people have to drop off, that's fine. Any thoughts on this?
I'll
I
I'll go
don't
real
think I have it.
quickly. One of the things that drives me absolutely bonkers is when influencers or misinformation mongers, as they call them for brevity's sake, leverage real issues. Uh, Women being treated poorly by the healthcare system, people of color being treated poorly by the healthcare system, LGBTQ plus communities being treated poorly by the healthcare system, bad science, use real issues to justify misinformation, unproven therapies, and a platform. It drives me absolutely nuts. And that's why I think we have to do both. We have to advocate for a more just and equitable world while at the same time using constructive strategies to fight misinformation. So I'll end with that. And by the way, I want to just say thank you. I know we don't have a lot of time. I want to thank everyone for this opportunity. Truly an honor to speak with this great group of people.
Thanks so much. Yeah, there's tons of questions. Obviously, we can't get to all of them. I just want to squeeze this last one, and I think it's really relevant. Is there anything we can do to prevent being exposed or seeing misinformation on social media other than just not participating in social media? Many of us have reduced our use of social media to preserve our mental health and take back our time. So how do we combat health information without increasing our use of social media?
My final words, I think it's impossible to avoid if you're on social media, you will be exposed to it. And I think it's just, all the things that we were saying is to be aware of it, to try not as best you can, not to unwittingly spread it. And we've all done it. Like Tim, I have fallen for it before, where you do immediately own it and apologize. Recognize and read so that you become better at identifying misinformation and knowing how to counter it. And if you yourself are not comfortable wading in, you can at least kind of not get involved, or you can direct them to someone who is. And then, as always, look after your mental health. You don't have to get into the weeds with every single angry bot out there. Choose who you engage with, preserve your mental health, pick the battles that are worth fighting, but also remember that you may not change the mind of the person you're engaging, but there is a silent majority who are often watching. And so when I'm engaging with some furious anti-vaxxer, it's often not, I know I'm not going to change their minds, but it's the people who are reading and watching who I'm hoping will see that there is information that runs counter to the false narrative that's being put out there. But most of all, look after yourselves. Your mental health is more important than being right on the internet.
I'd love to make a case for, oh, sorry. Have I interrupted someone? Oh, okay. I'd love to make a case for Tim, what you said about nudges. So I've built my algorithm brick by brick. I'm weaponizing the very things I know they're using to reel me in. Emotionally evocative content, weird kind of signifiers of credibility when folks actually aren't credible. Those sorts of when you know that there are certain strategies that are used on social media to kind of suck you in and disinform you. My thing is like you've always just got to be on as a way to verify whether something is misinformation or just like stop yourself from falling into that trap. So every time I see something that's in like evoking really strong emotions, we're scrolling. We're done with it. Every time I see someone wearing scrubs and sitting in their car, we're done. I can't like I've been duped before. This is all TikTok. I just think it's so important for us to have those personal habits that, like we are kind of doing our best to wrangle emotionally evocative content. We're being intentional about our algorithms. And so if we are to stay on social media, and many of us are, we just have to be a bit more, I guess we just have to like police ourselves more if we can't just stop using it altogether. And then when we do see ourselves falling into the trap, noticing when your mind changes, noticing what you're susceptible to, and stepping away, touching some grass, and taking care of your mental health, as you said.
Solid advice. Lucas or Tim, any words on that?
No, I think this is all fantastic advice. And I love the idea of remembering that you are trying to be manipulated. Just that going to social media with that knowledge, that helps a lot.
Well, with that, I guess we will wrap things up. Thank you all to the four of you so much for joining us, for presenting today, for sharing your thoughts and insights on this very relevant and topical subject. And thank you to everyone who joined us today and participated in the conversation. As always, we are never able to get to all of the questions, but we are going to try to organize more events like this in the future. We'll obviously keep this conversation going amongst ourselves with our colleagues, with everyone. This is just, it's something that we're dealing with on a daily basis. If you can take a couple minutes to fill out the survey, we'd really appreciate it. We are going to be giving away one lucky winner who fills out the survey will get a copy of Tim's new book, The Certainty Illusion. Again, I can't thank you all enough for being here today. Really appreciate for you making the time, and just such a wide range of things to cover on this topic. And all of it was just so insightful and really also practical. I'm grateful to have this conversation, to have these tools moving forward as we continue our work in public health and in healthcare in general. And thank you to everyone who tuned in today and made the time. We will be in touch with the recording and all of these resources that were posted in the chat. Again, please help us by filling out that survey, and we will be in touch for future events. Thank you all so much, and thank you to all of my colleagues at PHSA who helped put this together. Really grateful that this happened today, and also walking away with a lot of learnings. So thank you all so much. Take care, and watch out for misinformation.